LimbFit was not on my radar 3 years ago. My son was in the hospital and had clotted off his aorta. By God's grace, survived, but his legs didn't. And during his recovery, he asked if I was going back to Africa. And I said no. I didn't think that I would. And he said, I think you ought to go back to Africa, and I'd like to go with you. I told Chagorya Hospital that we were coming and my son was going to accompany us. 3 weeks before we went to Chagorya, there was an announcement that an amputee was coming and they were going to have an amputee clinic. And so we arrived and found out that there were 175 patients that were coming to the amputee clinic. There's one story that was particularly moving. A man came into our office. He was brought in by a friend. And this man had a good job. He was putting up antennas on houses, and one day he touched a power line and he ended up losing both of his arms. And while he was in the hospital, his wife realized that he was no longer going to be able to support the family. And so she took her 5 children and went back to her village in the north of Kenya, and he was left. And he was discharged from the hospital, and he was homeless, living in the street. And this man who brought him in was a Christ follower. Began feeding him, clothing him, and taking care of his hygiene needs, and began praying that God would somehow provide a means by which his friend now could have some type of independence. And he prayed for 7 years. And he brought in his friend. And as we saw him and evaluated, I looked over at this man, and his arm was in the air, and he was praying continuously, thanking God for providing this clinic, for providing for his friend, for answering his prayer. And as we fitted the arm, this man asked me before he left if he could pray one more time. I said, yes, you can. And so he lifted his arm up and he prayed, and he said, thank you, Lord, for providing for this, my friend. And as he prayed, I looked over, and the man who he just fitted with prosthetic had raised his prosthetic arms up and was thanking God. And I looked at this scene before me, and I thought, I'm standing on holy ground. That was an event that was life-changing for me and for Doug. As we made plans to start this, we thought we can target Chagorya Hospital, where we worked, and we can also target Goma, Democratic Republic of Congo, where we also had a relationship. Goma is an area where there's a lot of suffering. There's warfare. There's an active volcano. There's intertribal conflict. In 2012, there was a conflict that spilled over into the city of 1 million. And there were 2 individuals that were caught in the crossfire, a young man and a woman. And we saw them in our clinic. And I remember listening to their stories and then seeing their injuries and then fitting them with prostheses. And I remember so distinctly seeing the hope that had arisen even as I sat there and watched them adjust to their new prosthetics. And it so touched me that it was another confirmation. And so we began talking about what could we do to encourage or to support or to address the needs of the amputees, specifically in Africa. We started to look into what it would take to put together a foundation or a nonprofit. And unfortunately, Doug passed away 6 months later from an accidental overdose. This was a difficult time, obviously, for me, but the conversation that we'd had that was ongoing about what we wanted to accomplish in Africa and elsewhere in a developing country became a real passion, not just to provide a prosthetic, but to come alongside the individual and to give them that spark of hope, to stand with them, to continue a relationship with them, but ultimately share the hope that comes through Jesus Christ. As a board, we've talked about this. We don't want people to walk into eternity with a prosthetic without Christ. That's not our goal. We want them to walk into eternity with Christ and a prosthetic. But that's what Jesus did too. When he said, take up your mat and walk. And then share the joy that came from seeing their response. You know, they were the proclaimers of the truth and who Christ was. You know, the ones that he healed they're all in, and they let everybody know, and the message went out through them. And I think that I think that as I look and as I see people fitted for a prosthetic, that's going to be our proclaimer. That's going to be the one who shares Christ, and they'll know us by our love, and they'll proclaim it. By God's light, the nations will walk. You know, as we trust God for all this, He's also entrusted us with what He wants to do through us. And I say yes.